Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Coach Gaglione here. There's another edition of the Powerlifting for the People podcast. I'm your host, Coach Gaglione. And today we got an interview style podcast today with Orlando. How you doing today?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
All right, awesome. So today we're going to be kind of discussing kind of the whole topic of kind of research as it pertains to strength training and as it pertains to kind of powerlifting and strength sports and things like that. So I just kind of want to dive right in, but just for the people that are listening that maybe aren't familiar with you, Orlando, can you just give us a little bit of background on just who you are and like what you got going on right now?
Yeah, for sure. I guess I should say first, thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
I am currently a PhD candidate at Seton Hall University. I am also a full-time college professor at St. Peter's University. I teach exercise science. It's in Jersey City. I've been teaching for 3 years, and then kind of in conjunction with that, I'm a little bit more in the applied world where I have my own training facility in Stony Point, New York. I've had that for about 8 years. Most of my clientele is probably high school to college athletes. It's about 80% of my clientele. I do have a small powerlifting following as well, where we're actually hosting our first powerlifting meet in about now 4 weeks. And I also am a track and field coach at my local high school. That takes up a lot of my time for about 6 months of the year. So, I've got this kind of nice blend between research, teaching, and kind of the applied world of, strength and conditioning and performance.
So just kind of before we kind of dive into kind of the research portion of things, I'm just kind of curious, like for myself, and maybe I'm sure the listeners are, like kind of how you kind of got into like lifting and strength, like yourself, and maybe like why you kind of got into, obviously like you're still coaching others. It seems like I can identify because I kind of juggle a lot of things as well. So I guess, how did you kind of get into it to yourself? And then how did you kind of start, I guess, working with other athletes as well?
Yeah, I mean, at least as far as getting into strength and conditioning, I guess my path was a little bit more unique. I was a distance runner in high school. I ran the half mile, the mile, cross country. I was pretty good. And I was always injured, let's put it that way. And I think that's kind of what got me interested in training and training methodologies, back in, I graduated high school in 2004. Back then, I used to spend a lot of time on message boards. That's where I'd spend my time reading like how many miles per week people were running, and all these different training interventions about running. You kind of fast forward, I don't know, probably about 10 years ago, I was still into endurance training. I gradually got into resistance training to supplement my endurance training, and at some point, I realized where if I was going to start training people professionally, because I was considering it, I don't know, around 26, something along those lines, I couldn't be a 140-pound distance runner. No one would take me seriously. So at some point, I dropped distance running and triathlons and all that good stuff, and I transitioned to resistance training. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of how it started. It started pretty slow, but, pretty quickly I got into it, deadlifting, squatting, benching, and all that good stuff. That's been about probably 8 years now, give or take.
Cool. So I'm not going to kind of make this about me, but I kind of had a similar kind of story too, where my sport was wrestling. It wasn't definitely was not running. That's never really been my forte, but I had some injuries as well. And, I was very close to achieving my goals as a high school athlete, but I kind of tore my hamstring my first football practice as a senior. So I basically ended up wrestling on like one leg, and that kind of like, and I was still, I'm not sure like kind of where you went to school and that sort of thing, but my goal was to be like an all county wrestler. And I ended up losing in the round to place in like double overtime. And I still hadn't like healed fully from that hamstring injury. And I knew that if I was healthy, that I would have been in position to like achieve my goal. It was like literally like that, like it was so close. And I know like, so that kind of drove me like a little crazy to like want to learn. So I could definitely identify with that. And that's kind of like how I ended up kind of falling into powerlifting shortly after, but so pretty cool stuff. So fast forward a bit. I'd love to kind of hear more about like your backstory, maybe another time, but I want to kind of just get into the meat and potatoes of today's discussion, which is kind of your research that you're doing right now. And kind of like, my understanding, and as far as like, because my background, I'm kind of self-taught in this field. I have a teaching degree actually, and I have a personal training certification through like, I studied, took some classes at Hofstra, and it's now APTE is now, like, they just rebranded. But so, a lot of people kind of like, there's a lot of arguments and stuff, like, if you're kind of a bro science person, or if you're like evidence-based, like kind of a buzzword. But it seems like you do a nice job of kind of blending. Like, I know that, you still kind of like actively lift yourself, and you kind of walk the walk. And I think that's great. And you're still like, obviously, like, not just, doing experiments and things like that, but you're still coaching people. So tell us a little bit about like the project that you're working on right now, and then maybe like why you are kind of interested in kind of, pursuing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of goes back to, you know, ideal and optimal training. I'll throw back my high school career where I was always injured. Well, why was I always injured? I'll never forget in college, again, this is running, but a coach, he was trying to punish us, and he had us do extra hill work. He ended up running like an extra 4 miles of hills, and it aggravated a knee injury. And I was out for like the next 3 months when he was trying to punish other runners. I mean, I wasn't even doing anything wrong. So I grew up looking at, why am I getting hurt? And I started looking at different things, like how many miles per week was affecting this, the intensity of things. And then as I got into resistance training, that's when I started my research career. And I started to think, okay, well, what's the optimal way, the quote unquote optimal way to maximize strength while minimizing injury? And I think that's kind of how it started, this research path. And then, at least as far as, I mean, we haven't really talked about velocity, but that's kind of where we're going to go. Velocity started in my master's degree, which was now probably 7-8 years ago, in like 2015, 2016. I initially saw some research on velocity-based training around then, and I brought it to my advisor for my master's program, and she just said in like 2015, I mean, she just said there probably wasn't enough research to do a full master's degree on velocity back then. And, she was probably right. So I kind of had to put it off for a few years. So I didn't really get into the kind of meat and potatoes of velocity-based training until about 2018, give or take.
And I guess while we're kind of talking about that, maybe for the people that are unfamiliar with that kind of style of training and how you would use it. So can you give, like, if you want to maybe tell us a little bit about maybe the devices that you currently use and how you personally implement it, if how, because I know, like, I've kind of messed around with it here and there. We have a couple of we have the open barbell. I have not upgraded to like I guess the rep one sensors yet. It's something I'm kind of considering, but maybe you could sway me one way or the other. But tell me a little bit about like how you use it and like what that looks like for people that are unfamiliar.
Yeah. So to give you kind of a quick full background, I really started looking at periodization, and periodization methodologies. And, to give you a definition, that's the planned manipulation of training variables, right? And of those training variables, what I think is one of the most important, is probably the load on a barbell, right? So how do we determine what the best weight is to train on a barbell? Like, are we training at 100 pounds or 200 pounds? And what's going to maximize our adaptations? So the gold standard is what we would call percentage-based training, right? Where, you have these plans, you do a 1RM. After your 1RM, it says train, I don't know, 5 sets of 5 at 75%, something along those lines. And that's kind of the gold standard. You see that at a lot of colleges. You'll see that in a lot of pre-built programs that people sell online. And it works. Like, I'm not putting down percentage-based training. A lot of people use it. It's the gold standard because it works really well. But there are some, what I would consider, potential flaws in percentage-based training. So some of those flaws might be that these relationships that we think we have with a certain percentage of 1RM aren't perfect, right? So when we say do 75% of your 1RM, one person could potentially maybe do 8 or 9 more, or maybe we'll say a total of 10 reps more after they finish, right? I think the standard number is like 10 reps at 75%, right? But another person might be able to do 20 reps, right? At that same exact percentage. And is that person that could do 20 more reps when you program 5 reps at 75% getting the same stimulus as that other person? And that's where I started thinking. And that's really where I'm looking at both velocity and RPE. That's where those methodologies kind of come into play, right? So velocity based training is the way I use it is you would have to build what we call an individualized velocity profile. So somebody would go through 1RM testing, and whenever we're testing their 1 repetition maximum, we would record the velocity at every single attempt going up to their 1RM. So we've got this really strong relationship of how fast the barbell should move at, let's say, I don't know, 50%, 70%, 90%, and 100%. And then we create this profile. And looking at this profile, we can predict on average how fast the barbell should move at a given speed, or excuse me, at a given percentage. So that's kind of how I use it right now and how I'm using it for my dissertation.
Cool. And I'm almost like I have to stop myself a little bit because I'm kind of have more questions on that for my own selfish reasons. But I think that's awesome. And I think what I kind of like about the velocity as a tool too, it's just it's a little bit more black and white, than like an RPE, which I think we can kind of maybe get into that. I think that could be a good kind of segue to that. So for people that are kind of unfamiliar with that kind of terminology, and how are you using RPE as far as in your I guess in your study, and are you kind of doing like what Mike Teixeira is kind of coined as their 8s, their 9s, and the 10s, or do you a similar scale or anything like kind of different, or how are you using that in your study?
Yeah, so to give you kind of like a full background, I've got 3 groups in my study. One group is a percentage-based program where they're going to follow percentage for 8 weeks in a kind of a linear progression. And they're only going to use percentage to determine weight on the barbell for the given day. The second group is the velocity-based group. And then the third group is the RPE-based group. And they are only going to use RPE to determine weight on a barbell. So the RPE that we use is, yes, it's pretty much exactly the Mike Teixeira RPE scale, a 1 to 10 scale, where it's associated with how many more repetitions we think we could have done at the conclusion of a set. So, a 10 means obviously you couldn't have done anything else. A 9 means you could have done 1 more rep. 8, 2 more reps, so on and so forth. And I'm pretty lucky where I'm sure you're probably familiar with Eric Helms. Eric Helms is actually on my committee. He's in New Zealand. I reached out to him because as I was reading his dissertation, I said, hey, this is exactly what I want to do, but with RPE. So basically they follow the 8 weeks, but instead of me giving them, a percentage on a given day to follow, like 70%, they say, hey, you're supposed to do, let's say 8 repetitions at a target RPE of 5 to 7, right? If you finish a set and your RPE is like a 4, we're going to go up in weight. If you finish if you finish a set and your RPE is a 10, we're going to go down in weight. Right. So we adjust the weight on the barbell based on their RPE for that given set.
Cool. Yeah, I think it's definitely a neat thing. And I guess my question is also too, and if you're, I'm not sure if you're able to answer this fully or not, but so with all like your percentage based training, your RPE, and then your velocity, how are you, trying to, control for, technical, breakdown and things like that? At what point is, because obviously maybe I can rate a set as an RP 8 and I could still kind of maybe maintain a, pretty close to my normal form, whatever that means. And then, or like maybe I felt like it was an 8, but maybe I cut my range of motion a little bit, or maybe my knees knocked in quite a bit. Or so is there, a point where, how are you controlling for, variability in the athlete's form on like a given exercise?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that could be one of the potential issues of research. I can't speak for other researchers, but for me, I've coached many lifters in USAPL powerlifting meets where, USAPL is super strict on technique. So during our initial orientation and pre-testing, I go over what we would consider proper technique for all the lifts and make sure we're clear with them on what's standard technique. Now, with regards to it breaking down as intensity increases, I mean, it's going to happen. I would say, like I said, I'm, maybe a quarter of the way through my study, probably just a little less. So far, surprisingly, everyone's been pretty good. I haven't had any issues with like on squat, people cutting squats really high. With deadlifts. I mean, everyone's been really, really good. Surprisingly so far.
Cool. I think that's awesome. I think that definitely, if you maybe did this study like 20 years ago or something, that maybe would be different, but maybe you can kind of speak a little bit to, I guess, I'm excited for like and people are kind of doing studies like this, because a lot of times we find, at least from what I've seen in research, it's not always people that kind of, really have a high training age, or maybe like they weren't really instructed on like mechanics and things like that. You maybe just get some kind of college kid like off the street and maybe has never lifted weights before. So I think sometimes it could be hard to kind of extrapolate any kind of meaningful, I guess, outcomes, or can we actually use these studies? And so maybe you can kind of talk a little bit like what is like your kind of goal? Like, what would you like to see like happen with this? And, maybe like why like having a little bit more of like, I guess, longer term studies with actual trained individuals is going to be like helpful, like for, just to move our field like forward, so we could actually get some insights from studies like this.
Yeah, I mean, that's like you said, like 20, 30 years ago, research was a little simpler. We could say with research, it's really hard to recruit participants. I'm obviously relatively new to research. I am struggling. My committee says, "Oh, you need 48 participants."
Yeah.
I don't think there's any way I get 48 experienced participants, and that's the problem with research, where if you have, let's just say, a non kind of field person, they don't actually work in the fields, and they're more of just an academic, where they read research and they don't really understand the true difference of how impactful running a study with a untrained individual is versus doing it with a trained individual. I mean, the results can be almost meaningless if you have complete novices.
Yeah.
So that's always a struggle. As far as my future with kind of this study and kind of my goals, I think when I first started, I saw a lot of potential with velocity, and I still do. The way I kind of liken it, because again, I was a distance runner and a triathlete, I think there's potential for velocity-based training to go the route somewhat similar of heart rate monitors in distance running. Like if you look at distance running 40 years ago, 30 years ago, heart rate monitors weren't really that often used, maybe with high advanced athletes. But nowadays, I mean, everyone's got a GPS watch with heart rate monitor. Every coach, they've got all sorts of platforms and apps which can help dictate various training zones for distance runners, right? I think velocity-based training can definitely go that route. I think the the cost of the equipment has come way down. I mean, I know back in the day to buy a unit, it was like $1,500 or something. Nowadays, I've had personal experience with 4 different units where I own 3 different types of units, right? And the average cost is about $400 now, and I think that's going to continue to come down pretty significantly. So if we could get the cost of a unit down to $200, then all of a sudden people have a lot more exposure to this stuff. And then when they have the exposure to that stuff, they're going to say, what the hell do I do with it? And that's where coaches can kind of come into play, where if we can refine our approach on how to use velocity, I think it really can kind of go the route of kind of heart rate monitors back in the day.
Cool. I have like, there's like so many questions I'd love to just talk shop a little bit more, but I want to also just be mindful of your time and things like that. So I want to definitely help kind of spread the word a little bit. So can you tell us a little bit more about, like, you mentioned you want to help recruit some more people for the study. So like, who exactly would be eligible to kind of do the study, and then, how can they contact you and all that stuff? Because basically what I'd like to, my goal for this is, number one, expose people like yourself and kind of, that are in the area. So like, we're local to, you say you're in Stony Point.
Yeah, I should be about, I don't know, about a 70-minute drive from where you are, give or take, depending traffic.
So, I guess it's more, and then I guess surrounding towns that you can kind of, I guess, pinpoint that are like local to your area.
Yeah, so anyone in Rockland County or Westchester County would be pretty close to me, within a 20 to 30-minute drive, which is relatively reasonable. As far as the participants, I'm looking for people, male or female, ages 18 and over. There's no cap. They have to have at least 2 years resistance training experience. In addition to them having 2 years of resistance training experience, you have to have regularly or somewhat regularly trained the squat, the bench, and the deadlift the last 6 months. Because I've got people that have come to me and said, "Oh, I train the squat and the bench, but I don't train the deadlift." And unfortunately, if you don't train the deadlift, it would totally skew the results. So you have to have trained the big 3 lift, squat, bench, deadlift. And then in terms of minimum 1 RMs, I actually just lowered them after speaking to my committee. If you have a resistance trained following, I'm sure people have no problem hitting those, but it was 1.2 times your body weight squat, 1.0 times your body weight for bench, and 1.5 times your body weight for deadlift for males. Females was just 1 times your body weight for squat and 0.6 times your body weight for bench. I was actually having some trouble recruiting. Like I've got one guy who's a fairly advanced lifter. He could deadlift just shy of 600 pounds, squats over 5, but he's a pretty big boy, about 245, give or take, 250. His bench, he's just not a strong bencher. He benched, I think, 275, something along those lines. And he didn't qualify for my study because his bench was not 1.2 times his body weight. So the criteria was just lowered a little bit because we're realizing pretty much that someone is struggling in one area.
Yeah, and I'm sure he's probably still like proficient enough in that lift.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not, yeah. So it's just, but it also just goes to show you that, yeah, you just, like you said, you could be advanced in one area, but still proficient in a lift and just, just not quite as strong, or maybe there's an injury or something. So yeah, I mean, so again, like my hope is that we just get, use some more participants for this. I'd love to see like kind of the results of the study. Velocity is definitely something that I'm also kind of interested in. I do think, I don't know if you have any more opinions on it yourself. I think especially if you're like working with, like you don't have like a live coach, I think it could be a really valuable tool. It's something that a couple of my remote clients use with a lot of success, and that helps kind of auto regulate their training a little bit, especially when I'm not like there to kind of give them like live feedback. I do think, a little biased, but I do think having like a coach like with you is like the best thing, if especially when you're kind of learning. But not everyone has access to a team of people. Not everyone has access to, or they may not have the funds to have an online coach. So I think once you have a reasonable like foundation of technique, using, like I said, percentages, RPE, velocity, and some combination of them, I think could be super valuable. So I'm definitely interested to see the results as well. Where can people find you? And then I guess and then let people know as far as if there's I guess any deadlines to signing up and things like that. And I guess also like, what is the commitment? I guess how many, do they need to see you in person? How many days a week, and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so you could reach out to me via my Instagram, Multisport Workshop, or you could just email me, which I guess you could put that in the show notes. As far as the commitment, you would have to come to my gym in Stony Point. You would have to train at my gym for a period of 8 weeks. That would involve a pre-test of 1 RMs and body comp. you would have to train at my gym 3 days per week for the 8 weeks. Right now, we are running training sessions Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. It has to be on non-consecutive days. We do have training sessions as early as 4:30 a.m., as late as, well, we finish up around 7:30, 8 p.m., right? So we've got early mornings and late afternoon, evening options as well. And yeah, that's pretty much it. You could bounce around. You could do one early morning, one evening. But again, as long as they're on non-consecutive days, you're good. You're allowed to miss up to 2 training sessions. If you miss more than 2 training sessions over the course of the 8 weeks, you'd be disqualified from the study, which makes sense. And I think that's pretty much it. Anything else I miss?
No, I think you got everything. So we'll, like I said, we'll include your contact info in the show notes. Again, I appreciate, having you on, and, thank you for, and anyone that's listening, I think that regardless of what group you end up kind of being in and that sort of thing, I think it'll be a very valuable kind of learning experiences to kind of go through an 8-week program, at a professional facility. I think that that's just going to be a really valuable experience, especially if there's like kind of maybe some younger athletes or some, high school athletes that maybe or have the summer off or something like that. I know that there will be this will be going on, I guess, for several months, but I would just, recommend, if you do have the summer off, if you do have some time off, I would just kind of take advantage of that now. And I think it'd be very worthwhile to even just explore like what works for you, because I'm sure you're going to probably find that some people may there might be some outliers, there might be some results you might need to potentially throw out that it'll be kind of an interesting experiment, even just for like the N of one that kind of does it, and see like how it works for that individual athlete. So well, I just want to thank everyone for listening again. Check out Orlando, and I'll include his Instagram and email so you guys could check out and be part of his study if you're in like the kind of Westchester area. Thank you guys so much for listening. Until next time, stay strong, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Thank you.